The galaxy was vast and its rulers were many, but among them all there was none more powerful than the alien queen. Her empire stretched across star systems, a network of worlds united by her iron fist and unmatched intellect. She was a leader who commanded respect from allies and fear from enemies. But even such power could not shield her from the deepest pain a mother could feel. Years ago, her daughter, the young and brilliant Princess Ceres, had been sent on a mission to a distant, uncharted planet. It was meant to be a diplomatic assignment, a simple journey to negotiate peace with a neighboring faction. But that mission had gone horribly wrong. A transmission from the princess had been intercepted, a cry for help followed by static. Then, silence. For the first time in her life, the alien queen had felt vulnerable. She had lost many battles and seen many of her enemies fall, but losing her daughter, her only child, was a pain unlike any other. The royal palace, once a place of grandeur and celebration, had become a darkened shell of sorrow. The grand halls echoed with the footsteps of her servants, but there was no sound of joy, only quiet whispers and the occasional murmur of her advisors. The queen had shut herself away in her chambers, unable to face the world outside. The loss was a wound that never healed. Every day, the queen searched for answers, sending fleets of ships to comb the farthest reaches of the galaxy, deploying the finest trackers, and offering unimaginable rewards to anyone who could bring her daughter back. She even turned to the ancient prophecies, hoping against all logic that some forgotten force might restore what had been lost. But after years of searching, there was still no sign of Princess Ceres. The queen began to believe that her daughter was gone forever, that the mission had gone wrong, and Ceres had met a terrible fate on that distant, hostile world. She buried herself in the work of ruling the empire, but her heart remained cold, unable to move on. The people of the empire whispered that the queen's once unstoppable resolve had begun to waver. The spark of compassion that Ceres had always inspired in her had dulled. The empire continued to expand, but it was as if its heart had been torn out.
The queen ruled with an unwavering hand, but her eyes lacked the warmth they once held. Then, one evening, the news came.
It was not the message the queen had been waiting for. It was not the news of her daughter's return, or even her death. It was something else entirely, something unexpected.
A ship arrived at the queen's palace.
It was unmarked, with no insignia or identification. A small, unassuming vessel, its presence unnoticed at first. The royal guards, trained to respond to threats swiftly, had almost missed it entirely. The ship landed silently on the queen's private landing platform, a secluded area where only the most trusted ships could come and go. For a moment, no one knew what to make of it. The guards were hesitant, unsure if the ship was an ally or an enemy. The queen's closest advisors had heard nothing of a scheduled arrival, and there were no known diplomatic missions or trade deals with this strange vessel's origin. The stillness of the moment hung thick in the air. The quiet hum of the palace seemed to fade, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The hatch of the ship slowly opened, and from it, a figure stepped out. At first glance, the queen's heart skipped a beat. There, standing before her in the twilight of the landing platform, was her daughter, Princess Ceres. But this was not the same young woman who had left so many years ago. The princess had returned, but she was different. Ceres stood tall, her eyes now sharp with experience, her posture firm with a kind of quiet strength that spoke of hardships endured. Her skin, once smooth and unmarked, now bore the faintest signs of time, scars from battles fought and challenges overcome. Her once soft features had become hardened by a world that had tried to break her. But it was the presence of the figure beside her that made the queen pause, her breath catching in her throat. Standing by Ceres was a human, a species the queen had once considered beneath notice, an insignificant race that inhabited only the outermost fringes of the galaxy. Humans were weak, primitive creatures, far from the technological marvels of the alien civilizations. Yet here stood a human, tall and broad-shouldered, not as a prisoner or slave, but as an equal, walking beside the princess. For a moment, the queen's heart stopped. Was it a trick? Had the princess been captured and corrupted by these human creatures? No. Ceres looked nothing like a prisoner. There was a fire in her eyes, and she moved with confidence. She was no longer the young girl who had left. She had become something else, entirely. "Mother," Ceres said softly, her voice stronger than the queen remembered. "I've returned." The queen's first instinct was to rush forward, to embrace her daughter and hold her tight, but something stopped her. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Ceres closely, looking for any signs of manipulation, any indication that her daughter was not the person she once knew. "Where have you been?" the queen asked, her voice cool and controlled, despite the turmoil rising within her. "What happened? How did you come to be with this human?" Ceres stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "I was taken," she said, her voice firm. "Captured by a faction of renegades. They held me on a distant, barren world for years. But this human," she gestured to the figure beside her, "he helped me survive. We fought side by side, and we survived together. This human saved my life. He's not my enemy, Mother. He's my partner." The queen could feel the weight of Ceres's words. The human did not bow, did not cringe before the queen's powerful presence. He stood tall, eyes steady. This was not the humble, frightened human she had expected. This man, in his strange armor, exuded a confidence that made her pause. His demeanor was nothing like the timid, weak creatures she had encountered before. The queen's mind raced. She wanted to feel rage, to demand that this human be removed from her presence, but she could not. The look in her daughter's eyes was enough to make her doubt. Ceres was not a fool. She had chosen this human for a reason. Perhaps there was more to this human race than the queen had believed. Maybe they were not so easily dismissed. As Ceres continued to speak, explaining how the human had been her ally in their struggles, how they had formed a bond stronger than any political alliance, the queen listened intently. The more Ceres spoke, the more the queen began to understand that this was no ordinary human. This man had not only survived on a hostile world, but had done so with her daughter at his side, and that, in itself, was no small feat. The queen felt a strange emotion rising within her, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope that her daughter was alive and well. Hope that perhaps there was something to this human that could be of value to her empire. And yet, a part of her remained wary. Could she trust the word of a human? Could she accept this new reality that Ceres had brought with her? As the night wore on, the queen allowed herself a moment to reflect. The future of her empire had always been certain, controlled by logic and power. But now, there was a new force in play, one that the queen could not easily dismiss. The question was no longer whether her daughter would return, but what the queen would do with the unexpected arrival of a human who had changed everything. The queen stood in silence, her piercing gaze shifting between her daughter and the human. The words Ceres had spoken echoed in her mind, but they seemed almost impossible to believe. How could a human, a species she had long dismissed as weak and insignificant, have survived on such a hostile world? And more importantly, how could this human have become her daughter's companion? Ceres had been gone for so long. The queen had never imagined that the child who had left as a young woman would return not only with a human, but with a tale of survival and bravery that had taken them through the most difficult trials imaginable. The queen's mind raced, her emotions torn between disbelief and curiosity. The human stood beside Ceres, his body still, yet the presence he carried was undeniable. His eyes, though not of the same regal nature as the queen's, were sharp and focused, much like the princess's. He was unlike any human the queen had ever encountered. His armor, though simple, bore signs of countless battles, and the quiet confidence in his stance spoke of someone who had lived through more than any alien would expect from a human. Saris looked up at her mother with determination in her eyes. "Mother, I understand this may be difficult to accept," she said softly. "But everything I've learned, everything I've become, is because of him. He saved me. He gave me a reason to fight, and we survived together." The Queen's thoughts swirled. It was difficult to fathom that her daughter had spent so many years on a hostile world. But what troubled her even more was the way Saris spoke of the human. It wasn't the usual condescension reserved for a lesser species. There was genuine affection in Sirius's voice. The Queen had to admit, despite her reservations, that she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a hint of hope, something she had long buried beneath the weight of her empire's demands. But this was still a human, a primitive creature that was, at best, a curiosity. The Queen's empire was built on strength, intellect, and technology. To her, humanity was little more than a footnote in the grand tapestry of the galaxy. And yet, the princess had returned with one of them. This was no accident. This was intentional. For a long moment, the Queen said nothing. She studied the human carefully, trying to find some sign of weakness, some fault that would confirm her beliefs. But she saw none. In fact, the longer she looked, the more she realized how little she truly knew about humanity. They were a species full of surprises, of contradictions. Saris had once been a symbol of their superiority. She had been a princess destined to rule, to carry the weight of the galaxy's expectations. Yet now, standing before her mother, she was telling her that her strength, her survival, had come not from her royal bloodline, but from the bond she had forged with this human. The silence was thick, the tension palpable. The Queen's mind was at war with itself. She had to make a decision, a choice that would determine the future of not just her daughter, but the entire empire. Could she truly accept this human, as Ceres had? Could she acknowledge the possibility that humans, with all their weaknesses, had something of value to offer her empire? Ceres, sensing her mother's struggle, spoke again, this time with a tone of quiet conviction. "Mother, I know this is difficult for you, but please, understand that he is not like the others. He fought by my side, and we overcame everything together. He has taught me more than any other being ever could. He has shown me a strength I didn't know existed." The Queen's eyes narrowed as she considered her daughter's words. She had been a mother for so long, and her instinct was to protect Ceres at all costs. But as a queen, she knew that emotion and sentiment could not guide her decisions. The fate of her empire depended on her ability to see beyond personal feelings, beyond the bonds of motherhood. But there was something in Ceres's voice, something that made her question everything she had ever believed about humanity. Finally, the Queen turned her gaze to the human. "You speak highly of him," she said coldly. "But I must know, what makes you so certain that he is worthy of my trust?" The human, who had been silent until now, met her gaze without flinching. His posture was relaxed, but there was a strength in the way he carried himself. He spoke with a calm that matched Ceres's, as though he, too, had learned to survive in the harshest of environments. "I don't expect you to trust me," he said, "but I will prove myself to you. I've seen more of this galaxy than most ever will, and I've learned that strength isn't just about technology or power. It's about survival. It's about finding a way when there seems to be none." The Queen studied him for a long moment. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight to them. For the first time, she began to wonder if there was more to this human than she had ever realized. The galaxy was vast, and it was filled with countless species, each with their own unique strengths. Perhaps she had been wrong to dismiss humanity so easily. After what felt like an eternity, the Queen finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You will stay, for now," she said. "But you will prove your worth. I will not tolerate weakness or failure. The human nodded, his face betraying no emotion. "I understand, Your Majesty." Ceres stepped forward, her heart lifting with relief. "Thank you, Mother. I promise you he will not disappoint you." The Queen gave a small nod, but her thoughts were far from settled. This was just the beginning. There was so much more to learn, so much more to understand about the human who had become a part of her daughter's life. But one thing was clear. The world had changed, and with it, the Queen's understanding of what was truly valuable. Later that evening, as the Queen sat alone in her private chambers, she couldn't help but reflect on the events of the day. Her mind kept returning to the human, to the way he had looked at her, to the way Ceres had spoken of him. It was a strange feeling, one she had not expected. She had ruled her empire with an iron fist, relying on power and strategy. But here, before her, was a creature who had no such power, no such advantage. And yet he had proven himself in ways the Queen had never anticipated. Could it be that humanity held the key to something she had been missing? The Queen's thoughts raced as she weighed the possibilities. She had always believed that the strength of an empire came from its dominance, its ability to crush all who opposed it. But perhaps, just perhaps, the future of her empire could be different. Perhaps it was not about power alone. Perhaps it was about finding strength in the most unlikely places. The night stretched on, and the Queen remained lost in thought. She was still a ruler, still the queen of a vast and powerful empire. But for the first time in many years, she felt uncertain. And yet, in that uncertainty, there was something else. A flicker of hope. The next morning, as Ceres and the human were brought before her once again, the Queen's mind was made up. She would not let her empire fall behind in the changing tides of the galaxy. She would welcome this new alliance, this new way of thinking. But she would not do so blindly. There would be trials, tests, and challenges. Humanity would have to prove itself, just as Ceres had. "Tell me, human," the Queen said, her voice once again cold but calculating. "What do you know of war?" The human straightened, his eyes meeting hers with unflinching honesty.
"I know enough to survive."
"And I know enough to fight when the need arises." The Queen regarded him for a long moment. She knew this would not be an easy path, but the galaxy was a place of constant change, and perhaps in this human she had found something unexpected, something that could change everything.